operate. Several years ago, I was at the White House in the East Room participating with Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton in a nationally televised program celebrating the centennial. And to do this program, I and the other participants had all been very well sort of organized and trained, and I was given a list of questions, the first one of which was to be asked me by then President Clinton. And we're sitting on the stage, and I've prepared my answers very carefully to these questions. And Bill Clinton, you know, we walk out, we sit down, Bill Clinton's sitting right next to me, and he is handed, as he sits next to me, the question which he's supposed to ask me. And he looks at the question, cameras are already rolling, introductions are in effect. He looks at the question and he whispers to me, "I don't like this question. I'm going to ask you something else." And so I give you this panel, which doesn't know what I'm going to ask them yet, although I think they all have something interesting to say. So on my right is Michael Walzer. I think actually neither of our speakers need much introduction. Michael Walzer, commentator, I want to call him, social commentator par excellence, and the author most recently of this book, The Paradox of Liberation, which explores the relationship between what are presumably successful secular revolutions and the religious responses that follow afterwards. And on my left is Todd Gitlin, who's the author of many, many books, but probably most relevant to this group is a book called Chosen Peoples, which explores the relationship of Israeli questions to the United States. So both of our speakers are commentators, let me say it that way, of long-standing on the Israel-Palestine, U.S. question and interaction. I come at this from a different angle. My angle is that of, I suppose, a naive or I don't want to call myself an innocent exactly, but it's not my field of expertise in any sense. I come at it as the child of Holocaust survivors. I have had long-standing visits and interest in Israeli politics, but I'm by no means an expert. And so what I want to do is to ask our two speakers the kinds of questions that I imagine that are in the heads of people like me in my head. This is a panel which is on progressive visions for activism in Israel and Palestine. And so I'm going to confront our two panelists with questions about what can progressives do? Given what we have been hearing this morning, and given the usual responses to that, which is sort of throwing up our hands in despair over what we've heard and possible solutions, is there any role for American progressives, for American activists to play in trying to resolve this issue? So I'm going to start out. I know Todd has something prepared he wants to say, but perhaps we'll let him say it in a little while instead of right now. I'm going to start out by asking both of you to be an activist, to take a position and to urge people to actually do something about what's going on in Israel and Palestine, to create a solution for peace. To be that kind of activist requires having or operating from a set of assumptions about where we're going, what are we looking for, what's the object of the activism. So before I start to ask you what you want to do, tell us why it is that you want to do it. What is it that you're hoping to achieve? Michael, let's start with you.
Well, I want to see a safe, secure Jewish state in the Middle East, at peace with its neighbors. And I have believed for many, many years, in fact, since 1967, that the only way that that can happen is if there is a Palestinian state alongside Israel. So I have the goal that I think so many of us have had for so many years, that sometimes seems to be slipping away, which is one of the reasons for meetings like this. I was 13, it was my bar mitzvah year in 1948 when Israel was born. I would like my grandchildren to see its survival, its success. That is for me the most important goal of my political life.
Would you call yourself a Zionist?
Yes, I'm a Zionist in the sense that I believe there should be a Jewish state, a state for the Jewish people. And I am a critic of the existing state, or at least of its government and its previous governments for some time, and an increasingly angry critic. But I want this state to survive. Yes, and I think that is what Zionism means today.
I'm the kind of Jew who, at some early stage of my life, and increasingly, although not always consistently, has felt that what it meant to be a Jew was to be concerned about justice, and that the most telling formulation of the goal of justice was formulated by a contemporary of Jesus named Hillel, who posed the famous questions: if I am not for myself, who will be? If I am for myself alone, what do I amount to? And if not now, when? I am the same kind of Jew who is, I want to say, morally and in every way I can imagine, offended and enraged by the pretense of a Benjamin Netanyahu to speak for me and many people I know. My goals are twofold. My first goal in all this was actually rather well satisfied this morning. And it's a pleasure to be in a room where smart people can agree on facts and logic, and on an emotional plane that makes sense of both the reasons for despair and rage and the possibilities of proceeding as an ethical person living in this world. So I start on a platform of agreeing with virtually everything that was said this morning about the nature of our situation. It also behooves me somehow to argue against the conditions that obtain. That is to say, to look for the crevices, the opportunities, the surprises, the hypothetical emergences which make the world what it is, namely, in many ways not so pleasant, unpredictable, and often astonishing. So I aim to enlarge the sphere of positive astonishment as an activist.
Sure. One thing in
mild disagreement. I am also a Jewish leftist like Todd, and I think my leftism has a lot to do with my Jewishness. But I think that there should be a Jewish state in the same way that I think there should be a Norwegian state. And I don't believe that the Norwegians have any special connection to justice. Or there should be a Jewish state whether or not Jews are committed to justice. And then in the Jewish state, Jews who believe in justice should fight for it in the same way that Norwegians should fight for justice in the Norwegian state. But the right of a people to a state does not depend on the virtue of the people.
Yeah, not only may you reply, but I would argue, or I would want to push you into replying by articulating the contradiction here. That is, you want primarily a Jewish state, and Todd wants a state which is a just state. Are those two reconcilable?
I want to, I've spent some time in Norway. I love Norway. And I love it not simply because they have some funny customs and costumes and language and so on, but because actually they are a just state, or they certainly aspire to be so, and they actually play that role all over the world. So yes, just to state my agreement here, I am for the existence of a Jewish state because the Jewish people are a nation and deserve to have a state as all nations do in a world of nations. I don't call myself a Zionist. In part for the technical reason, it seems to me that Zionism fulfilled its mission in creating that state, and that is now a fait accompli. But secondly, because Zionism connotes a passionate, well, what many people in the listservs that I've been circulating in recently will call love, rightly call love of the Jewish state. I do not love the Jewish state. Maybe it's a flaw, but in any case, that's the real difference between us on this. It's not that I think the Jews have to earn the right to be a state because Jews are more something than Norwegians or anybody else.
I don't love the Jewish state either. States are instruments, and the reason for having it, the primary purpose of the state is to guarantee the physical security and the well-being of its members, and the Jews need a state for that obvious purpose. I'm not if love figures, it would have to be Ahavat Yisrael, love for the people, not for the state. And even I prefer loving individual people to loving collectivity. So I would talk much more about loyalty to, commitment to, desire for the well-being of the people, and because the people need a state for the well-being of the state also.
Let me sharpen the disagreement a little bit by noting the following. So the big problem that we face, that Israel faces and the Palestinians face, is that of the occupation. And when I think about the occupation, I think, here's the dilemma that you both articulated, put in a nutshell. Can you continue to have an Israel which is an occupying colonial power and which is at the same time a just society? And if the answer to that is no, let's talk about strategies. What would you as intellectuals, as activists, as progressives do to suggest we do about this problem of the occupation?
So my answer to your question is no. There cannot be a just state which is an occupying power, that is to say, occupying the West Bank. This is, I think, a no-brainer. Or I would put it a bit further, that those who think they are staking out their Jewish righteousness by arguing in behalf of that colonial occupation are not Jews I want to include in my family. I want to read, actually, since I'm not reading the rest of what I wrote, but I do want to, and actually, this actually bears on practical work. Just a few months ago, a man you may have heard of, named Sheldon Adelson, one of the two gambling tycoons who are chief funders of the occupation and the regimes that sustain it, having pledged $25 million to build a medical school at Ariel University, which is on occupied territory, said when he made this grant, quote, "My many years in business have taught me that when a crack opens up in a certain spot, it must not just be filled in, but rather the whole wall has to be strengthened and sometimes the entire building. The donation to Ariel University is about building a Zionist wall in place of the crack." Now, to me, this is the voice of illicit aggression and endless war. And it bears no resemblance to what I can accept as a Jewish identity. Sorry, Sheldon.
Well, I agree with that entirely. I think that Peter Beiner was right this morning when he said that Israel as the Jewish state will not survive unless the occupation is ended. And that has to be the goal of our politics if we are committed to the survival of the Jewish state.
Can't hear.
Technologically challenged. It's okay. So we need to end the occupation if a Jewish state is to survive. I'm not sure I would want to deny the Jewishness of the people who are occupying the West Bank. Rashi said a long time ago that there are good Jews and bad Jews, but the bad Jews are still Jews. We've got to deal with them. In this case, we have to defeat them. And that is, I think, the crucial task of Jews in Israel. And our task is to help them do that. And I think, in fact, the defeat of the settler movement does not depend on an agreement with the Palestinians. I don't know if there is a Palestinian authority capable of guaranteeing the security of a border with Israel. I hope there is, and I would take some risks to see if there is. But even if there isn't, even if there is no prospect of an immediate withdrawal, the Israelis still have to defeat the settler movement. They have to pick a fight with the settlers by closing down some of the most far out, ideologically or geographically far out settlements, by passing the law that invites people to come back with compensation to this side of the Green Line. They have to pick a fight with the settler movement and win it. And that fight is for the soul of Israel. And we have to find the people in Israel who are prepared for that fight. They are our comrades, and we have to find ways to help them.
So let's then, I think this is on, let's then assume that we have some basis for agreement, i.e. we both want to end the occupation, we want to remove the settlers, we have a vision of full citizenship for Palestinians within Israel. We want justice for those both inside Israel and outside Israel. let me ask you the critical question. How? So here we sit in New York City in an American whatever. It's not a classroom, but it could have been a classroom. What are we actually going to do? For example, what about what goes on campus? Is there something that we as progressives should be doing on campus? Should we be supporting or negating the BDS movement? What should we be doing?
I have some ideas about how to confront the BDS movement, beginning with the recognition that it's a movement, it's not a, I don't